Joining me now is legal practitioner and foreign affairs commentator Dele Ogun. He's been talking on a number of issues and probably one of the best sources we can get on the Queen. Mr. Ogun, thank you so much for joining me on Diplomatic Channel.
Yeah, pleasure to be with you again.
The Queen is dead, that's no news, but she was said to be a ceremonial figurehead for many, especially the countries where she was queen and where they have prime ministers. But having met most world leaders through the years, would you describe her as the world's topmost diplomat?
Yes, very much so. She was the ultimate diplomat because if you consider that Britain is much more than Britain, this was and still is, in my view, the largest empire on this planet. And so therefore, the ears of so many governments that she had in her role as the face of British soft power, if you like. She could, simple audience with a prime minister or a leader of a particular country was a key part of the process by which Britain advanced its foreign policy. I mean, a clear example of that in the Nigerian context was shortly after she came to the throne in 1952. When at that point our nationalists were agitating for independence, and they had set a date, 1956, as being the date on which they wanted the British to pack up and get out. And what did they get instead? They got a visit from the Queen. That's when the royal tour took place, and that, of course, silenced all the voices for agitation, at least quelled it for a while. And so that's a clear illustration of the Queen's role in terms of the soft power front or face of British foreign policy.
Yeah, and there are some people who look at, the relations that the UK has with Nigeria, and they blame the country's ethnic and political crisis and challenges on colonization. Do you believe that colonization is partly to blame for Nigeria's current political and security challenges, especially the general problems that we have with trying to pick and choose who gets to govern the country and who gets to lead?
Those who know me know that I go much further than saying that colonialism is partly to blame or partially to blame. It is wholly to blame for our condition. Nigeria was not made by Nigerians. I've said that several times. I think that lesson is beginning to come through. And even the shape of governance at so-called independence was not shaped by Nigerians privately or to the exclusion of the foreign interests, because standing over the shoulders of the negotiating parties, bear in mind the constitutional conferences, it was in London that they took place at Lancaster House, standing over their shoulder, listening to every conversation and influencing the outcome was the British colonial secretary at that time. And I also point out to people, because they often confuse the role of our people. When I say our people, Nigerians on the ground, the Gowans, and the rest of them, they confuse their role as local agents for being principals. They were, and I maintain that they were agents of the foreign principle, which was the British government. And so therefore their actions should not be looked at as the actions of Nigerians per se. Yes, nominally, it was a Nigerian taking the particular step, but these were because of the British influence in getting them into the positions which they occupied.
Is it peculiar that, these issues are coming up now after the Queen has died? I know that in several fora they were raised, while she was alive, but not as prominently as now that she's gone.
Well, I think it's because she she was the embodiment of the British Empire. It's not very different from the positions of the transient governments, whether Labour or Conservative or Liberal. Those ones were here today and they were gone tomorrow. She was the permanent face of that empire. So it's not surprising that it's in the wake of her demise. There is a very much a sense amongst those who were affected one way or the other by the colonial experience. There is a sense that it's the demise of part of that empire as well. She really was the face of it. She was the embodiment of it. And so it's not surprising that there's so much discussion, almost like an audit of empire. When else, during her lifetime, it wasn't going to happen. It's at this point that people are taking stock. That what did it really mean? Who does she really represent? And to what extent should anyone feel affection for her and the family, beyond, of course, the natural affection of one human being's life coming to an end. But they are entitled to review the conduct of her government under her supervision. I mean, people often try and maintain that she was only a head of state and had no influence. That's not correct.
You mentioned Biafra, and I know that's a hot topic for many people, especially in Southeast Nigeria, and those who may have experienced, the civil war in Nigeria. It's also a divisive issue as well because it was discovered, well, thanks to the British journalist who revealed, intelligence information that the Brits were supplying the Nigerian government with weapons, and were even the ones who came up with a policy of blocking, the Southeast, from receiving food and aid and all of that, and leaving them to starve. So it is a touchy issue, isn't it? And many blame the British government for the role that they played during the Biafra War.
Well, I sent a tweet out on the back of that video, or attaching that video that you're referencing, and I simply put the caption, on Judgment Day, will this be admissible evidence? And show you the strength of feeling that's out there. On my last check, that video attached to that tweet has received 60,000 viewings, and it's been retweeted close to 2,500 times. And so there's a huge debate now going on, centered on that issue. And one has to juxtapose the Biafra experience with the Queen's role as far as the Ukraine war is concerned. She has made subtle utterances in respect of the Ukrainian war on the side of the Ukraine government, including, when I say subtle, you see flowers in yellow and blue in the background, sort of thing. But on Biafra, there was silence. And I think the Igbos and the Biafrans and the Easterners and all those who are adversely affected and are still suffering the after effects of that war are entitled to use this period to reflect and to speak out.
There's been agitation, as you already know, in some Commonwealth countries to abolish the monarchy, remove the Queen as head of state, have their own republics, have their own presidents. And I see more of that agitation coming up even, now that she's gone. Some have put a pause, on those agitations and movements in Parliament. But, what do you think, might happen, with the King being a little more transparent, than before? For the first time, we saw some of the processes of him becoming king, of what happens when a monarch dies and another one takes over. For the first time, we saw what happens behind the scenes. You think that's an example of, the kind of king he will become, and how he responds, of course, to these actions by these Commonwealth countries to get rid of the monarchy and have their own republics?
Well, I certainly expect increasing agitation amongst the remaining territories that still are attached to the British Crown, increasing agitation towards republicanism. I think that as far as the Queen was concerned, there was almost a sentimental attachment to her. They had grown up um, with the crown, and her in particular with Queen Elizabeth II. It is at the point of the baton change between her and Charles, who does not in himself command such emotional endearment, that I expect greater agitation for the republics in these places. And I don't think that Britain will have a veto on that. I think it'll be very difficult to hold on to those countries that want to go.
What sort of challenges do you think are ahead of him as king? Apart from, trying to warm up to the people, what other challenges are ahead of him in the coming days and the coming months?
Well, immediately, of course, it's the whole debate that's been generated by the Queen's departure on empire, on colonialism, on the British history, on the British legacy. His first major speech to the world, perhaps his coronation speech, will make interesting watching and reading because, as I said, there is a lot of backfire going on at the moment, and he's going to have to deal with that. Going forward, he will be haunted by that legacy, the legacy that attaches to that office. And it will be interesting to see how he navigates the tensions that will arise. As I've said, there'll be a greater push towards republicanism, and it'll be interesting to see how he rides the storm.
Do you think that Africa will make it to his list of priorities?
Well, I don't think that it will be so much his priorities. Africa will certainly be very high on the agenda going forward, and the clearest sign of that is the makeup of the new cabinet. Of course, they've got a new prime minister. It is the government of the day that drives the list of priorities. And the new Liz Truss cabinet has told us that Africa is high up on the agenda, but not for the right reasons. If you look at the portfolios that have been given out, you have the foreign secretary, I think his name is James Cleverly. He has Sierra Leonean background. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, Kwesi Kwarteng, is a Ghanaian, and the International Trade Secretary is Kemi Badenoch, nay Adegoke. And so that tells us that they are looking for money, and they know which direction they are going to face in terms of, because the reality with the combination of the Ukraine war and the COVID crisis, that they're in financial difficulties at the moment. And she's indicated they're going to borrow their way out, but the borrowings, of course, have to be repaid. And the anticipated profits are going to be got from somewhere. And so I think it's a question of Africa look out, because the empire is returning with a new face, a very West African face in particular.
That's an interesting way of looking at it.
Well, it's there for us to see.
Indeed. Well, as we end this interview, the king, in his first address, did send his love to Harry and Meghan. They're no longer senior members of the royal family. But we saw a united front on Saturday when the Prince of Wales, William, and Catherine, the Princess of Wales, invited Harry and Meghan to join them in this walk of unity, to talk to the people standing outside Buckingham Palace and to thank them for their support. Look at the flowers, look at the names and the letters and everything that's been dropped in front. Harry was one of the last people to have heard his grandmother was dead, and was invited to the palace. I sort of felt there was a twinge of regret, looking at him making that lonely trip all the way to the Balmoral Castle, leaving alone again. and then not having that connection with his brother, do you think he might be rethinking, his decision to leave the UK and stay in the US? Do you see a comeback for him?
Well, I bear in mind this was his grandmother, and so he felt one understands that he was very attached to her, and one can understand what uh, the sentiments that he was expressing. I'm not sure Meghan was with him though, and I think bear in mind that that's the heart of the issue. And the heart of the issue was, as I understand it, was the new King Charles and his bride Meghan. And as far as I'm aware, he has a book that's in the pipeline. Now the Queen has gone, that book is coming out, and I think it's going to be a barnstormer. It's going to be a tell-all, and it's going to be hard hitting. So when you're looking for the immediate challenges that King Charles III is going to have, it's going to be on that domestic front when the story comes out. So yeah, it's going to be a tricky baptism for the new king on all fronts.
Yeah, and it is important, is it, to present this united front to the rest of the UK and to the rest of the world. He has to be seen as, extending the olive branch, to the son who decided to leave, and give this appearance of unity, things of them ironing things out, and there being no animosity between him and the king, and even with Meghan, even though we noticed she hardly spoke to Catherine at all during that walk.
Yes, well, of course, naturally, they're in the public eye, especially at this time. Everybody's watching their every move, every utterance. And so they have to work hard to try and create that appearance of normality. Whether that's a reality is a different matter. As I say, when the book comes out is when the clock starts again, as far as that relationship is concerned. And I think that, together with all the other indiscretions of members of the family, combining with this period of transition, the baton change from the Queen to Charles, with his more checkered story, I think all of those are going to contribute towards, as I say, more republicanism, more breakaways, and who knows, a renewal of the debate over whether it's time to end the monarchy.
Dele Ogun, it's been a real pleasure speaking with you, and so many insights you've given us into this topic. Thank you again for joining me on Diplomatic Channel.
Real pleasure.